Welcome to our final instant reaction podcast with a little bit of reinforcements on your screen here with Faxon Childress of 105.5 The Roar. You've heard me when he's filling in on the radio. He and I always like talking it out. We chop it up. It's always a good time. And I told Faxon, and he asked me, but I had a spot reserved for him for when the champion was crowned, and the Boston Celtics are the 2024 NBA champions, taking down the Dallas Mavericks 106-88. Faxon, let's just get your instant reaction. For me, this is the culmination of a long, I think, heartbreaking journey for this core of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So many different variations. Kemba Walker, Kyrie Irving, Tristan Thompson was starting on this lineup at one point. Ime Udoka, there's so many twists and turns, but in the closeout game when it mattered most, Tatum and Brown do some special things, and Banner 18's being hung up here pretty soon. What were your instant thoughts as we have a new NBA champion for, I think, it's like the 7th consecutive year?
Yeah, first of all, Grayson, congratulations. Obviously, know how special this is to you. You got the finals hat on, you're repping the Celtics gear, and it's a well-deserved championship for the best team in basketball. If we're being completely blunt, not trying to downplay anything, but this was expected. This was an all-time great basketball team, which I think people will look back on and realize when they see how they stack up numbers-wise to some of the all-time great teams. This team just went 80-21 over the course of the regular season and postseason. They lost 3 total playoff games, top 10 all-time for playoff winning percentage in a playoff run. I mean, it's absolutely incredible what Boston was able to accomplish this season. And I think, Grayson, one of the things that we're going to talk about over the course of this episode and this instant reaction is kind of what this team looks like long-term and some of the things that we want to, kind of peel back the curtain on and dive into. This Boston team ain't going anywhere, which you very well know already. So I think that's kind of the most exciting part for Celtics fans is, yes, you've been through 107 playoff games of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum to get here, but you finally got over the hump. You finally brought in the Western Conference, and they're going to have an exciting time to be a Boston Celtics fan because you got to have the feeling internally that without injuries, back here next year, potentially playing in the finals once again.
Yeah, and this was a team that was able to go, I believe, 10-1 without Kristaps Porzingis in this playoff run, and his health was a big question mark going into this season as how reliable can he be? I believe he played close to 60 games this year, less than half of the postseason in this Boston team, who I expect Al Horford, if he doesn't come back next year, to potentially retire and just come off as an NBA champion. But this team, structure-wise, they're going to sign Derek White in the offseason. They're going to extend Jason Tatum to a supermax, and if we just talk about Jason Tatum real quick for all and Jaylen Brown for all of the narratives surrounding them. Jaylen Brown having an epic collapse against Miami last year, now a Finals MVP. Jason Tatum had to hear the conversations of can he get it done when it matters most. 31, 11, and 8 in Game 5 of the NBA Finals to secure the championship. In terms of this duo, they finally scratched off that big monkey off their back with the Denver. I feel like when we look at NBA champions or potential contenders, Dallas will be in the mix. Oklahoma City will be in the mix. There's going to be a healthy 76ers team. Miami's always going to be a problem. How do you sort of see 2025 playing out for this Boston team? I feel like in part the monkey is off their back and it's no longer playing with pressure. It's saying how many more can we get with this core that's signed on for a very long time?
Yeah, I think it's a unique and interesting situation for Boston headed into the next season. As you alluded to, you got Jaylen Brown on the richest contract in NBA history. You're going to extend Jason Tatum to the supermax contract. You've got the rights to Derek White in the offseason, and you're obviously going to extend somebody that was such a vital piece of the championship. The team's going to have to delve into the luxury tax over the course of the offseason, but they've been smart with how they've manipulated the way that they built their roster and some of the contracts and the front loading and the back loading. Once again, Brad Stevens deserves more credit than anybody for this championship. Number one, to be selfless enough to take a back seat and say, you know what, I can't coach this team to their highest potential, but I think I know the recipe to success in the front office side of it. So to go from being genuinely one of the best coaches in the NBA, I know he never got over the hump, but those teams were young and making deep playoff runs, man. One of the best coaches in the NBA to the best executive in the NBA tip of the cap to you, Brad Stevens. You 100% deserve all the love that is coming your way in the media throughout the course of this week and throughout the course of this playoffs. But back to the original point, which is that Boston's in a long-term position where they have a 3 to 5 year window, in my opinion, to continue to contend for championships with this core of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And if you can keep those two together, I feel like you're always going to be in the mix in the Eastern Conference. As far as you reference the Mavericks and a couple other teams that are projecting to be in the NBA, contention race next year. I think it's a big offseason for Oklahoma City. I think we can all agree that they're probably one piece away. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is one of the most impressive players in the NBA to me. I think he's a top 8 to 10 player in the league already. He was great in the playoffs. Jalen Williams, not good enough to be a second star yet. Chet Holmgren, not good enough to be a second star yet, and that's okay. Those guys are 22 and 21 years old, and they're going to continue to grow and develop. And the way that Sam Presti has constructed things out in Oklahoma City, they're in a position to cash in some assets to go get a star talent if they want to do such. So I think the NBA as a whole, Grayson, is so interesting headed into next season because of how deep it is, how much parity there is. And even though we see an all-time great Boston Celtics team with all these great teams that are coming out of the West that could potentially challenge them in the finals next year, provided Boston stays healthy and gets back to this stage, I think it makes for some really interesting matchups, specifically in the Western Conference playoffs next year. And then on top of all of that, welcome to the party of having a target on your back for 82 games and every single game in the playoffs. The Denver Nuggets just went through it, and it sucks. Everyone plays more physical. Everyone plays more intense. Everyone wants to beat the champs. And the Timberwolves were able to overcome the Nuggets through some injury issues for Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr. playing one of the worst series of his career. But the point being, in a lot of those post-game interviews, Joker, Murray, MPJ, they were talking about the stress, the pressure of being the defending champions. So I'm not going to pencil in Boston, one day after the championship into the NBA Finals. But what I do know is that they'll be the overwhelming favorite because they were the best team in basketball all season this year. They'll be the best team in basketball on paper next year, and they're in a great position to make a run. But it definitely is going to be an adjustment for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown because now you got the target on your back and you're the enemy of the other teams in the NBA.
I like to actually stick on that point that you made that the Nuggets just went through this as the 22 defending champs, and now Boston having now the title that on their back. Who in the East do you feel, before we talk about sort of legacy and what this title means for Brown and Tatum, and then we'll talk about a little bit of Dallas for a second, but who in the East in your mind immediately pops in your head as a team that if they were to face Boston in the playoffs, given the current structure, let's say Boston's starting five, top six is relatively the same. I think Al Horford, that's a toss up for me. And maybe Boston tries to bring in a couple depth pieces through free agency on some, I think, probably veteran exceptions. Uh, for me, it's probably Miami, just because of the history between the two of them. But New York could be interesting next year. The OG Anunoby experiment never got to be fully fleshed out. And then obviously you have Philadelphia, who's going to be just in terms of their rivalry, even though it's been pretty lopsided between them and Boston, I could see them being adding maybe a Paul George this offseason to try to add another star to combat with Boston, who in the East potentially could be that Minnesota Timberwolves team of this year and take down the defending champions and potentially stop them from repeating as NBA champs.
Well, there are a couple teams in the East I want to hit on. I don't know if they're going to be able to take down the defending champions. And also, Grayson, I remind you, I feel like we're going to be getting a lot of free agency news ASAP because they've changed the ruling around free agency. So free agents are allowed to sign tomorrow, the day after the championship, and already be in negotiations and talks. So we could see some quick movement fast that could really shake up the league. But not privy to that information right now, not knowing the free agency signings. A team that's been, on the verge of breaking through, in my opinion, is the Orlando Magic. I think that it's a team that's flown under the radar because they're not sexy, right? They play in Orlando. They don't have a super loud or a passionate fan base. It's not a super storied franchise. But Paolo Banchero played a damn good series as a number one option against one of the best defenses in the NBA and took that series 7 games. Franz Wagner, really, really good player that really developed into that role as the secondary star. I've seen Klay Thompson links to the Orlando Magic. I know he's a little bit washed, but they really need shooting and some help in their guard room. So I think depending on free agency and potentially what could happen in the drafts and with some trades and also with the development of Anthony Black and Jet Howard, Orlando's a team to keep your eye on going forward. As far as in the immediate future, who can contend to beat the Boston Celtics next year, there are 2 teams that come to mind immediately, and it's the Milwaukee Bucks and the Miami Heat. Milwaukee had a weird season this year, right? You've got a coach that gets fired in the middle of the year. You get Doc Rivers in and seemingly make all these adjustments. and you crash out in the playoffs because your best player gets hurt, right? Giannis doesn't play. We all know they beat the Pacers if they win that series. It's just part of the NBA nowadays. Stars are going to get hurt. It feels like someone gets hurt in the playoffs every year. But I don't want to count out Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo in that experiment yet, because Giannis is a player that led his team to a championship just 3 seasons ago in this exact league, and you could argue he did it with a worse supporting cast than what he has right now. Now, the league overall is a lot better. The Eastern Conference is a lot better, and the Boston Celtics are a lot better. But I still think that Giannis Antetokounmpo, Chris Middleton, and Damian Lillard, when all healthy and engaged, can make a run and potentially push the Celtics. Just because Giannis is the only one that can technically match that star power that Boston has with Tatum, you can make an argument that the only player in the Eastern Conference that's better than Jason Tatum is Giannis. So for me, they'll have the best player on the court, in my opinion. I'll give them a shot. And then as far as Miami goes, Grayson, to wrap up a long-winded point, you know that Miami has seemingly had Boston's bogey card for whatever reason for the last couple of years. Maybe it's Spoelstra just being a genius and the best coach in the NBA. But when Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo are playing together and running through that high pick and roll game in the middle third, they've really given Boston some issues over the course of the last couple of years. Now, obviously, Boston was able to handle them in 5 in the first round this year. There were injuries to Tyler Herro. Jimmy Butler didn't play. There was a lot of context about that situation. I would keep your eye on Miami over the course of this offseason. And the main reason I'm mentioning them is because we know how aggressive Pat Riley is to acquire a secondary star or to try and push his team over the hump. I think Eric Spoelstra proves he can coach up bums this year, because they were rolling out players that I had never even heard of in the playoffs, to be completely honest with you. You got to get that guy a roster that's able to be competitive, and he's going to get you 2 games per playoff series. I absolutely guarantee that. So the big 3 in my mind in the Eastern Conference next year: Boston, Milwaukee, Miami, in that order. And then I have Philadelphia and Orlando in the rearview mirror. Joel Embiid's got to prove it to me, man. I like the guy. I know that's a controversial take. I like Tyrese Maxey. They got to prove it to me that they can do it on the big stage.
Yeah, and it's going to be a big challenge, even with that target on their back. When Boston is playing that 5-out offense, and now they've had a season to mesh and a championship proof in the pudding to go with that. And so, before we talk about the Jays real quick, I'd love to touch on Joe Mazzulla real quick, and a guy that I think last year was thrown in the most inconceivable situation for a behind the bench coach, having to basically say, "Hey, you're going to be the one that weathers the storm on this Ime Udoka controversy, and basically good luck with a roster that we know now was incomplete, and they are maybe a Jason Tatum injury away in Game 7 from being in the NBA Finals against the Nuggets last year. They pick up right where they left off from the regular season. It feels like Mazzulla had really gotten his stride, and there was a couple of instances in this playoff series, this playoff run for Boston, where it just clicked in my head. I would love to hear your thoughts on it, where I thought, that's a pretty damn good coaching decision right there. He's very much learning on the fly, and he outcoached Jason Kidd, Rick Carlisle. I think Eric Spoelstra's probably toss up just because that Miami team was so depleted, and obviously JB Bickerstaff with Cleveland, but he put on a coaching masterclass, in my opinion, with how he was able to handle the Porzingis injury. They'd have Luke Cornett playing 20 minutes a night against Cleveland. There was a lot of obstacles thrown Boston's way, and they go 16-3 and win the finals. And three of these games were largely blowouts and in Boston's control. What were you, with Joe Mazzulla's second run of the playoffs, now one of the youngest NBA coaches to win a championship? How did he impress you this second year?
Man, I can't say enough good things, and I couldn't be more happy to be wrong about Joe Mazzulla. I wasn't originally a huge fan of the hire, just because Ime Udoka. It was a weird situation with him going out the door. We don't need to touch on all that, all the off the court stuff. But I really believe in him as a basketball coach. Nothing to do with his personal life. I thought he was a fantastic basketball coach, and I didn't know if Mazzulla was going to be able to match that level that Udoka brought with his intensity and his leadership. But what I have learned over the last 2 years is that Joe Mazzulla is sick in the head. He is an absolute basketball sicko, and that is the best thing you can be as a basketball coach. I mean, look at Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley's a little sick in the head for UConn, clearly, with the way that he behaves on the sidelines, but he's so intense and so good at his job, and he's such a perfectionist, and he's so focused on the details. Mazzulla reminds me a lot of Dan Hurley in that way. He's a little bit more calm on the sidelines, but my favorite Mazzulla moment was him contesting Royce O'Neal's shot in the Suns game, and then going off in the post-game presser like, I asked all my guys to contest, didn't want him making an open a shot on our basket, walking back to the bench and feeling confident. Staff's got to be on that too. We got to be contesting shots going to the bench. And like that's just the perfect depiction of that guy, right? He was so locked in all season. You can tell he was hurt last year by that Miami series loss because Boston had a legitimate chance to push Denver in the finals if they were able to get to that stage, and I truly believe that. So hats off to Joe Mazzulla in year number 2. No sophomore slump. He came out and kicked everybody's ass for 90 plus games this year.
Yeah, and I think what's really classic Joe Mazzulla is the game's in hand and 3 minutes to go. He challenges an out of bounds call on Luka Doncic and the Mavericks, and you're like, look, that's just who Joe Mazzulla is. He's kind of a psychopath.
The guy's epic, man. He's epic. I'd love to hate on the guy, and like once again, like Boston sports are universally hated outside of Boston for whatever reason. I just don't hate the Celtics. Maybe it's because I'm your boy Grayson, but like I just couldn't find it in myself to hate this team. I really like Jaylen Brown. I think Jason Tatum. I know we're about to transition into that anyways, but let me ask you a question, Grayson. As a Celtics fan, 107 games between those two jokers, and you finally get over the hump to win the championship. You're listening to all the media for years. You're listening to all your boys in the group chat. I know how it is, man. You're listening to everything. You're listening to all the noise, and I know how much of a diehard Celtics fan you are. For your boys, JT and JB, man, it's your podcast. You take the floor for a minute and just talk about what that means to you.
I mean, I've been watching them grow up from the beginning, and there's been a lot of heartbreak. I've seen plenty of game 7 losses. I've seen plenty of just mind-numbing decisions from the two of them, but I think last year was a wake-up call in 2023, and Tatum actually spoke on it very well. He said we sort of just expected to get back to June, and we didn't take care of the details. And I think for Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, they were the perfect co-stars for a team like this. I really push back on the term super team for this group just because I think of the Durant Warriors when they won back-to-back
Yeah.
titles with 3 Hall of Famers in your starting lineup. Now, Boston very well may have at the end of the day 3 or 4 Hall of Famers. I believe they probably have 4 if you look at Tatum, Brown, Horford, and Drew Holiday. Maybe Derek White and Porzingis get there as well if they had another chip with this Celtics roster. But what they've been able to do, they talk about sacrifice all year and just that when no matter what it takes, how long it takes, we're just going to get it done. Is the selflessness in today's weird basketball world, weird athletics world where everything seems to be handed over to you on a silver platter. And that's a conversation for another day for sure. But I thought they were the perfect, and I said this on when you were filling in for Qualk on the Roar, this was the perfect duo to lead this team because of that selfless nature and that maturity and understanding that even when the chips are down, they can get it done, but they understand that Porzingis is a damn good basketball player when he's healthy. Drew Holiday, man, what a season for him after
He
I've
played a
never
perfect
seen.
series. Like he was the X factor, man. I think it was through game 3 he had like 13 assists, 0 turnovers, elite defender, and was shooting 50-50-90 splits. Like Brad Stevens robbed people blind this offseason. Like legitimately went in and took the lunch money from multiple all-star caliber players for the Boston Celtics and then won a chip and flexed on everybody.
Now, in terms of where this puts Jason Tatum, because he's finally got the one thing that he had the conference finals appearances, he had an NBA finals appearance, he's had multiple All NBA first team selections, All Star game MVP. He didn't get finals MVP, which I think it was a toss up at this point between Brown and Tatum, but he has a championship and he closed it out. And I think what's so many people remember about Giannis is that closeout game 6 and the 50-point triple double and the way he sort of came out and performed when it mattered most to close out that series. And so for Tatum to drop 30 plus points, a near triple double against this Mavericks team that many picked to beat the Celtics, let's not forget that. How fondly and where would you rank Jason Tatum after a playoff run like this? I thought he was top 8 was no argument. I'd be willing to concede down maybe to 6, if not 5, depending on who you slot up there. Where do you see Tatum, and then where do you see Jaylen Brown as I think a top 15 player in this league now? I think Boston, it's maybe a fair argument, but I may get some pushback depending on who you are.
Yeah, no, as far as Tatum goes, I've been conflicted on how to evaluate him as a player for a while because I feel like Jason Tatum should be more aggressive and should be more assertive than he is. But the thing that really impressed me just throughout this entire Celtics team was the unselfishness that you alluded to. Jason Tatum did not care that he wasn't scoring because even when he wasn't scoring in the series, and even though he shot the ball in an inefficient manner over the course of the series, he was impacting the game in other ways. He was taking on tough challenges defensively on the wing. He was playing great help side defense. He was helping out on the glass. His assist to turnover ratio was not good. It was great. At one point in the game tonight, he had 9 assists and no turnovers. You don't fluke that. His playmaking has taken an astronomical leap to where it was 2 years ago. So, yeah, the box score stats didn't look great. And yeah, he didn't win the finals MVP. But my favorite player of all time, Steph Curry. And Steph Curry has won finals MVP in his 4 championships, and he's a unanimous top 10 player ever. At the end of the day, your career is not defined off of a 5 game sample size. Jaylen Brown was probably better than Jason Tatum for 5 games. He's still not the better player overall. Jason Tatum, I would have him in that 6 through 9 range in the top 10. I think he's at absolute worst, the eighth or ninth best player in the NBA. I could put him as high at 5. I could be talked into that. And then I think Jaylen is probably the next tier, a little bit lower. And I would consider saying Jaylen's as high as a top 12 to 14 player in the NBA at this point, just simply because of what he was able to accomplish on both ends. I mean, the reason that I think Jaylen Brown deserved to win the Finals MVP, and you can box score truth all you want, and you're gonna run yourself to death trying to do that, figuring out why the media voted for this person over this person because of the box score. Because, like, once again, in 2015, we all know Curry deserved it over Iguodala. Like, there have been multiple instances of this in the past decade from the media of voting who what seemingly would be the wrong player to win Finals MVP. But this year, I think they got it right, even though the offensive box score stats favor Tatum outside of efficiency, because Jaylen Brown took on the task of guarding Luka Doncic for the majority of every game. He was elite as a point of attack defender. There were multiple times where Boston went on massive runs as a result of Jaylen forcing turnovers out of Luka's hands, and it felt like Jaylen killed Luka and his confidence in multiple games. And then, Grayson, we also would be remiss to forget the fourth quarter and second half takeover from Jaylen Brown in game 3, which really felt like it ended the series, including that dagger with about a minute left, that step back mid range jumper, which I'm sure you'll never forget and will be a core memory for you because it felt like at that moment, that was when Boston won the championship in game 3.
Yeah, and I think for Tatum and Brown, they've got their iconic moments now, and now they have an off season. They're gonna go play for Team U. I think Tatum's on Team USA. I don't know if Jaylen Brown is. I haven't.
I don't think he made it, which is ridiculous. But
That's.
I mean, what are we
I guess
doing,
he'll go.
man?
Brown will go take a vacation or something with his new contract. Like I think he's okay.
You might be able to
But
buy an island with that contract at this point. You can probably buy Jaylen Brown Island and make it his own thing if he really
maybe
wants to. With $350 million can get you a lot.
buy a statue of that left hand and just have the Finals MVP in there or something like that. But Faxon, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on two quick things. I want to touch on Dallas and how they got here, and then talk about their performance in the finals, and more specifically Doncic and Irving, which I believe I found to be largely disappointing from those co-stars. Just to start with Luka, offensively, you know what you're going to get out of him every single night. Him dropping 30 points. He probably is the most skilled scorer in the NBA in terms of just every shot. It feels like it's going in. If it doesn't, it's a surprise. And the thing that really disappointed me with Doncic, and I think this is something he'll have to learn if he wants to be a champion, is the effort on defense and the constant barking at officiating. Just I think it tired out a lot of NBA fans this series. It certainly wore on me, and maybe that's because of the Celtics thing. But a lot of people that I know that are just neutral are just like, if Luka would stop complaining and get back on defense and provide some quality effort. We're not asking Luka to be an all NBA defender here, but the effort of just keeping guys in front of him, stalling maybe a couple seconds or more so help can get over to the top. It just felt like this was a pretty around poor performance from him in terms of a complete game. And then Irving, I think when it just came to the Boston crowd, it was just a shell shock of I just expected him to rise to the occasion a tad bit more, being the experienced guy. I think they're going to learn a lot from this, and I personally think they're going to be contending just because those two are one of the most skilled duos in the NBA, if not the most skilled duo in terms of just pure offensive efficiency. But man, this Dallas team, maybe they need to add another co-star that's able to weather the storm a little bit, or Doncic is just going to have to quit piping out his mouth to the refs because man, that put them in some bad spots. And I think in to keep this point rolling, I think it somehow plays in the official's mind. If they're getting barked at constantly, I don't feel like they're inclined to help you in that case. If they're constantly after every possession hearing a Slovenian accent telling you what the F, man, and then rolling back to their court. They're not inclined to help you. What was your take on this Dallas Mavericks team? Getting to the finals, obviously, an incredible accomplishment for them so early in this duo's experiment, but man, I feel like they left a lot out there.
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts on Dallas, and yeah, I've been on my men's league officials pretty hard the last couple weeks, and I haven't gotten any extra calls as a result of it. So I need to stop acting like Luca myself. But in all seriousness, man, I'm just conflicted on how to feel about Dallas and the legitimacy of their path to getting here, to be completely honest with you. And I'm very much in the category of not discrediting teams and making unbelievable runs. Let's get two things completely straight before I go into this tangent. Number one, Luka Doncic was incredible over the course of this postseason. He was incredible against Los Angeles. He was incredible in the second round, and he was incredible once again in the Western Conference Finals against Denver. What he accomplished over the course of this postseason was ridiculously impressive from a team that went 47-35 in the regular season, was the 5 seed, and was the underdog in every series that they played. I was very impressed by Luka Doncic over the course of the postseason. I was also rubbed the wrong way in the NBA Finals by the way that he was complaining towards the officials, but it was very clear to me that he was banged up and just as frustrated with that situation as anything else. I think Luka Doncic will be back. I think that there is an overreaction and a lot of discourse going on right now about his defense. I think that I would advise people to go back and watch Luka Doncic play against the Clippers in the NBA bubble when he was skinnier, when he was a little bit more mobile, and he was actually a really good defender for portions of that playoff run. Luka Doncic played great defense in Game 4 while hurt and a little bit overweight in this series. For him, it's about being in good enough shape and consistent enough shape to be able to give the full effort in every single game. And Grayson, once again, we live in a world where we're going to over criticize and we're going to overreact to every single thing. Anthony Edwards was saying, man, I've never played this deep into a season. I'm absolutely gassed in the Western Conference Finals, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. And hey, like, you don't know until you get there. So, Luka, for me, the main objective of this offseason is to get healthy and get in shape. He's got a taste of it. He's a Western Conference champion at the age of 25. He's made 5 All NBA first teams at the age of 25. He was the scoring leader. He now has made multiple deep playoff runs as lower seeded teams with inferior supporting casts. Luka Doncic can win an NBA championship, but two things have to happen. Number one, I think they need to reshuffle the roster around him, to be completely transparent, because what Kyrie Irving did in this series was beyond stinking up the joint. It was terrible. Yeah, he was horrible in every single game outside of Game 4. And as a Steph truther my entire life, I'm feeling a little bit vindicated right now. Can these morons quit comparing Steph Curry to Kyrie Irving? Because it's not anywhere close. I mean, Kyrie Irving just completely failed to show up in the NBA Finals for 3 out of 5 games. How many other co-stars in the NBA get the luxury? I better see slander the first thing in the morning on ESPN, the way I would see for every single other secondary star in the NBA. Number two is you're deprived at the wing, okay? And when you're getting blitzed consistently, which is what teams figured out was the key to beat Dallas and to get the ball out of Luka Doncic's hands, you have to have people that are capable of creating their own shot or making decisions on the wing. Derrick Jones Jr. and PJ Washington is not a good enough front court to win an NBA championship. I'm sorry, it's just point blank period not. And I'm really sitting here questioning whether OKC or whether Dallas was all that much better than any of the 3 teams that they played over the course to get to their NBA Finals when those teams are entirely healthy. May we forget, Kawhi Leonard did not play in the first round for the Los Angeles Clippers. Paul George was banged up. They were dealing with injuries to multiple other key players in their rotation. And on top of that, in the second round, they play the youngest 1 seed in the history of the NBA playoffs in the Oklahoma City Thunder. And PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. played significantly above their means for multiple games. They squeaked out a series win in 6 games. My own man, Grayson, you know how passionate I was about Minnesota going into the Western Conference Finals.
Oh yeah.
Minnesota held a lead in the last 3 minutes of 3 of the 4 games that they lost. And they completely choked and they completely vomited all over themselves down the stretch. So, yes, Dallas was able to close out games. Dallas was able to take advantage of matchups and injuries. But if they run it back with this roster next year, I think they're in for a rude awakening because it's really unorthodox to make a deep run in the NBA playoffs like Dallas just did with a severe deprivation of wing talent like they have. And hey, maybe they get some solutions to that in the free agency and the draft. We don't know what's going to happen. But I think after that NBA Finals and even in the Western Conference Finals, where I thought he was pretty mid as well, you got to explore what the market would look like for Kyrie Irving for a potential trade because I don't think it's the match made in heaven with Luka Doncic that everyone else made it out to be. And in fact, I don't think they get out of the first round if Kawhi Leonard plays for the Los Angeles Clippers, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of teams in the West next year You mentioned something about getting a taste of that, and you don't know until you know, is that this Mavericks team in ways they're definitely they're constructed completely different, but it was like Boston in 2022. You have to learn. I think you have to get there. Some great teams win it on their first go, and some have to try again and get back like the Celtics just did. And you look at a Timberwolves team that could very much add another co-star, make some aggressive moves, and capitalize on what I think might be a much better Anthony Edwards next year. He strikes me as someone that is already in the gym, just trying to do everything in his power to get to the NBA Finals. You look at Denver, who, as their core is currently set right
Watch
now.
out, dude. Watch out, because next year feels like Joker revenge tour to me is the way that I'm thinking. Man, you can mark the record. I know we're on June 18th. It's Celtics Nuggets next year to me. Though that's the two that I've got my eye on. And I think that the Nuggets were probably the best team in the West this year, and Minnesota was just better on that given night at home, man. Like it just happens, right? It's a variant sport. It's going to happen. But I mean, you're a Celtics fan. Sorry to shift gears and cut you off a little bit,
Oh,
but
you're
I am
good. You're
interested
good.
for your perspective on this before we get out of here. You're a Celtics fan. Like, you were pretty confident about playing the Mavs. I don't know if that confidence level would have been as high against a team like Denver, who was coming off that having that championship experience. Because Boston, even though the narrative was, "Hey, these guys have never won the championship," well, they've been to the Eastern Conference Finals 6 out of 8 years, and they've been in the NBA Finals multiple times. They had the significant experience advantage against Dallas. So, what would you have felt if that was Denver on the other side? And what do you think about Denver going into next year? Because I feel like everybody's just kind of saying, "Hey, Joker, that was cool. Anthony Edwards has got this." I don't think that's going to be the case next year. I think Denver's coming for blood.
I have to agree with you on Denver. I know it's June 18th. The offseason is 30 minutes old right now as it stands, but I think I would be inclined to agree with you if we had to pick finals, pick an early. I know they do way
A
too early
way
mock
too early
drafts.
finals.
I think in the same sense as when they do mock drafts the day after the draft is over, is we're doing an early finals prediction now 31 minutes, so maybe it's a little later than we expected. But I think Denver is the team to beat coming out of the West. I know OKC might do some things in the offseason, but that's a Denver team that probably in their minds they completely fell off the expectations that they set for themselves. And I think something that was interesting, I don't remember the exact quote from Jokic, but it came off the lines of almost almost just relief that it was over, is the pure exhaustion on his end of having to
Yeah.
face that target on your back. And now you've had a longer offseason than most, and you're going to be trying to play in June again. I wouldn't be shocked if we see Denver as not an overwhelming favorite, but a pretty significant favorite to come out the West in 2025, behind maybe Minnesota and OKC, with Dallas being maybe fourth in that mix. I think LA probably blows it up this offseason and tries to get Paul. I think Paul George signed with Philly or OKC, and then we have just free agency could be fun this year. There's a lot of good players on the market, and
Man,
we need to
we
get you back on for that.
yeah, we got players on max contracts that are going to be moving throughout the course of the league. And also, the last thing on the Western Conference that I did want to hit because it's my team and my favorite player, Steph Curry, Golden State Warriors. I want to delusionally believe that there's one more run in Steph Curry, but the front office has to surround him with talent. I don't know if you've seen the rumors about Klay Thompson going to potentially Orlando and that he's now open to suitors around the NBA. It's going to be interesting to see. I know a lot of people hate the Warriors. I get it. You hate on success. And, Kevin Durant, what he did, it was a weak move. Let's call it how it is. I was a fan of the team. I wanted Steph Curry to win as many championships as possible. It was a weak move, and everyone knows it. So I get what the hatred is, but for me, it is an intriguing storyline next year because that big three of Steph, Draymond, and Clay breaking up, they've accomplished a lot. They won 20 consecutive Western Conference playoff series, 20. And now that big three could potentially be blowing up. We could see Steph Curry with a different supporting cast while still being a premier player in the NBA for the first time in his career. So I think that's something interesting to watch out West as well. And it just goes to show that, like, the fact that Steph Curry won a championship 2 years ago and won a finals MVP 2 years ago, and now they're already on the back burner from a national media scale in the Western Conference shows how freaking good the West is, man. The Rockets are going to get a lot better next year. The Kings are going to get a lot better next year. It is going to be a bloodbath out West next year. And if you think LeBron and AD are going away, if LeBron decides to stay with the Lakers, you're mistaken, because I guarantee that whoever they hire is going to take their best crack at making the most out of LeBron's maybe potential last couple seasons in the NBA. So, like, Grayson, I can't wait. Admittedly, the last couple of years, I've fallen out of love with the NBA a little bit, but it's in a place right now, and these playoffs were such high quality basketball, in my opinion, that they've sucked me back in. I'm going to be glued to Twitter over the course of free agency, and as you alluded to, I'd 100% be down to hop back on the pod when we start getting some news about where these free agents land. Man, Klay Thompson to Orlando, that could change a lot. That could change a lot because the Warriors would have a max spot freed up.
I do say if Klay Thompson goes to Orlando, I think Paul George is the instant favorite to pair up with Steph Curry. That would be fun.
That would
And
be
just
insane.
quickly, before we wrap up, I felt like when you talk about how quickly these championship windows can close, 2022, I don't think Golden State, in terms of they were one of those teams that made just an incredible run
Right.
and maybe had an underwhelming roster compared to what Boston had constructed in 2022. But it was so
100% fair.
validating, I think, from Stephen Curry as a top 10 NBA player all time to get that championship on his back all by himself. It felt like in certain games. And we'll see how the league plays out in 2025. I'm forever excited. Obviously, right now it's going to be an off season for pure joy from my perspective. And I'm glad we got to do this instant reaction with you. We finally got you on the podcast, and I think it's been 2 years, man. Been 2 long
Dude,
years.
it's been 2 long years. We tried to get an Eastern Conference Final preview in. My internet was completely bugging out. Appreciate all you've done coming on the Roar and chopping it up with me. That has been very helpful, and always love getting to chat it up. And the final thing I'll say is welcome to now having to defend your player's legacy on the all-time scale, because Jason Tatum is now going to be under a microscope for the rest of his career. Every single thing he says and does is going to be hyper analyzed, and people are going to critique him for not winning the finals MVP. My advice to you as a Steph Curry fan since 2009, that's been my favorite player pretty much my entire life. I was ride or dying for that man in the 5th grade when we were playing the Denver Nuggets in 2013. Like, I was showing up in my Steph jerseys all week. And I remember getting my heart broke by Manu Ginobili. Like, bro, you
Oh,
remember all these moments. And what I would say to you is just like soak it all in, man, because he's 26 and you get so many more of these freaking playoff runs. And it's better every single time you go back into the playoffs because your favorite player's got a chance to do something special. So, as somebody that spent way too much stress and way too much time tweeting about the finals MVP award, bro, seriously, screw the finals MVP award, screw the media voters, enjoy this moment in its fullest, because that's just as much JT as it was JB for the chip, Grayson. And you know it too.
absolutely, man. Guys, this is our instant reaction episode. The Boston Celtics are NBA champions. This was episode 166 of the Man with the Plan podcast. Before we go, Faxon, where can we find you? You'll have your Twitter actually on our background. I'm doing this little thing to point to the bottom of your screen if you're watching on our YouTube audience. But Faxon, where can we find you? And just give us a quick little snippet of what you've been up to.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Faxon Sports, on Instagram at FaxonC25. Yeah, just continuing to fill in and staying on the grind with play-by-play broadcasting and then radio show hosting over on 105.5 The Roar. I've been very blessed to continue to get some fill-in opportunities over the course of the summer. And as you know, Grayson, we always have a lot of fun when we come hang out. So I'd advise you guys come listen. Best radio station in the state of South Carolina, daily programming from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. All the hosts are absolutely fantastic. And whenever I'm filling in, we always make sure to incorporate the audience, get some callers in, get some guests, and have some fun. So I would just really advise you guys to check that out, especially for Clemson-related content. I know you got a big Clemson audience, Grayson yourself, with both of us being, well, you being an alum and me to be a soon alum, hopefully, if I can get out of the Spanish class, God forbid. But in all seriousness, at Faxon Sports on Twitter, and make sure you check out what we're doing over at The Roar, because we're having a lot of fun and doing some great stuff.
Faxon's Spanish class made it to our podcast reaction. But guys, thank you so much for all the support in this NBA Finals series. The Boston Celtics are NBA champions. And man, I am going to probably not sleep tonight. Thank you guys all for the support. Have a great day or evening or night if you're watching this at 2 a.m. and take care.